You're listening to the Mind Over Finger podcast, episode number 98.
Welcome to the Mind Over Finger podcast, discussions on mindful music making, efficient practice, and building a purposeful career. And now, your host, violinist, teacher, and high performance coach, Dr. Renee Paul Gauthier.
Hi, everyone. I hope this episode finds you doing amazingly well. Today, I'm so happy to have Leila Josefowicz back on the show. Some of you might remember that she was my guest for episode 82. And if you have not had a chance to listen to this episode yet, you absolutely must, as soon as you're done with the one you're listening to right now. She shared incredible insight on so many topics, including practicing, performing, learning music, memorization, etc. It's such an inspiring conversation, and we had such a fun time that we immediately decided to have another conversation, and boy, it did not disappoint. For those of you who have not had a chance to listen to episode 82, here are a few words about Leila's musical journey. Throughout her career, Leila has performed extensively on the world's greatest stages and with the best orchestras. Recent highlights include engagements with the Berlin Philharmonic, the LA Phil, Royal Concertgebouw Orchestra, Washington's National Symphony Orchestra, and Boston, Chicago, and Finnish radio symphony orchestras. Her passionate advocacy of contemporary music for the violin is reflected in her diverse programs and enthusiasm for performing new works. A favorite of living composers, Leila has premiered many concertos, including those by Colin Matthews, Stephen Mackey, and Esa-Pekka Salonen, all written specially for her. Leila has released several recordings, notably for Deutsche Grammophon, Philips Universal, and Warner Classics, and she's received nominations for several Grammy Awards. In recognition of her outstanding achievement and excellence in music, she won the 2018 Avery Fisher Prize and was awarded a prestigious MacArthur Fellowship. I love today's conversation so much. Leila shares amazing insight and wisdom yet again. She talks about her outlook for how things are going to be like in the coming months, how her recent incredible project at the Metropolitan Museum of Art unfolded, from where it originated to the vision coming to reality, the significance of her performing Bach, and how she sees Bach as the music of infinite possibilities. She tells us about what she calls the performance headspace. She shares about performance preparation and performance anxiety, what having fun in performance means to her, and many other wonderful musings. It's a real window on the way artists like Leila approach a project, the power of intention and the thoughtfulness they put behind each decision, how each aspect is carefully evaluated, weighed, and curated, and every angle crafted with care and love. And before I bring you Leila Josefowicz, I want to remind you that the doors for the Music Mastery Experience, my highly personalized group coaching program, are open for enrollment. If you're looking to reach a level of mindful practice that is going to shift your relationship with practicing, performing, and creating career opportunities, this is the program for you. If you want to walk in a practice room without ever experiencing hesitation and doubt, you want to feel empowered as you work, you want to start getting results and perform optimally time after time, you have to join the Music Mastery Experience. The program starts June 1st, and it's going to give you all the tools you need to unleash all of your potential. I designed this program to be the solution to your problems and to be the catalyst for incredible things in your life. You're going to practice effectively and enjoy it. You're going to feel empowered and free in a performance, and you're going to have the tools to create the musical life you want. All of the details of the program are at mindoverfinger.com/MME. So head there, take a look, and book your free conversation today because the program is already filling up Let's talk about your dreams, your goals, what's getting in the way, and how we're going to remove all of the obstacles between you and where you want to be. You're going to start seeing massive changes from the start, and you won't believe what you're able to accomplish by the end of the program. So go to mindoverfinger.com/MME, book your call, and let's get you started. I like to keep the group very small, so there are a limited number of spots. As I said, we start June 1st, and I know that feels pretty far away, but spots are filling up, and it's not too early to save yours. I can't wait to talk to you. And now, let's go to the show.
Okay, hello.
Awesome.
Great to see you, Renee.
Oh, it's so great to have you back, Leila. It really is such a pleasure to discuss with you. So I'm so happy we have another opportunity to do this.
And me as well. As I said to you before we began, bravo to you for making these podcasts available to players and enthusiasts, especially during a time when we don't have so many live concerts. This is a gift to people. So thanks to you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Leila, you and I talked a few months ago, and I really hope that the listeners who haven't had a chance to listen to this episode go back and catch episode 82. And you shared fantastic wisdom on memorization, what the practice of violin playing means to you. You talked about motivation, about vivid mindful practice, and so many other topics. And if you go back and listen to the episode, we hear all about your wonderful musical journey and how it unfolded. So if that works for you, I'd like to dive right into our conversation, and I invite the listeners to make sure they catch part 1 of the discussion so they hear everything about your background and all of those wonderful bits of wisdoms you shared with us. And actually, if they've listened to it already, I dare to suggest a second round. I listened to it to prepare for today, and you share so many powerful ideas, and episode 82 is definitely one to keep in the feed and listen to more than once.
I remember I had a great time talking to you, and you bring out the best in me talking about these things. So happy to dive right in.
Fantastic. Leila, we're entering year 2 of the pandemic, and as we're speaking today, there seems to be some stepping back and, new variants of the virus, and we're seeing some numbers go up again, but there also seems to be some glimmers of hope. So let's cross our fingers that things will continue to go in the right direction.
Absolutely.
And I would love to hear where you stand now, looking back at the last 12 months, what it brought to you, what you've been doing, and also what your outlook is for, where things are going, what they're going to look like in the coming months, both for you and for the musical community.
Goodness gracious. Well, I'm definitely not endowed with prophetic talent, but I think that people are healed by music. This is something that no matter what happens in the world, I am sure about. And just based on that alone, I think that musicians have a great responsibility in culture, in life, in people's outlook, in people's mentality. And I think one of the reasons why people have had such a hard time is that we can't in the same ways turn to art and turn to culture and turn to live performance the way we have in the past to sort of heal us. So hopefully these things can just keep moving forward, even with some twists and turns. That we have vaccines is huge, meaning that we can more comfortably travel, get on planes again, get to places where we need to be. It's going more slowly than we'd like, of course, but we have to focus on the positive once again, even though at times it can be hard to do, that we are in fact moving forward through this, and hopefully we can get things really back running once everyone is vaccinated. So that's sort of what I'm hoping for. In terms of just my own personal study and playing, certainly endless time for self-reflection. And that seems almost like a cliche at this point. And those of us who are able to, in some ways, self-reflect, but then utilize these kind of internal mechanisms into actual action. This is so important for us to do what we can. And some people are just more blessed than others right now, just from a human perspective, humanity perspective. And it's a very humbling time. I think it should be a humbling time for all. And that's sort of where I'm coming from with music. In some ways, I read a quote that said, musicians are like first responders, emotional first responders. And I thought, amazing, just so absolutely astute, so incredibly well said, and so true, that we are first responders, and we can use this time period to be first responders in whatever way we can, even if we're not helping people medically. In other ways, we sort of still are, because emotionally, our emotions are just at the core of our sense of self, our sense of identity, our sense of being on a day-to-day basis. It's emotions are what makes us human. Our emotions are what makes us feel and what makes us alive in a way. And so with these things in mind, I did probably the thing that people will most easily be able to access is a streaming I did at the Met Museum that was recorded in 2 days at the end of January and was broadcast and is still up, will be in perpetuity on YouTube from Met Live Arts, from the Metropolitan Museum in New York, Museum of Art in New York. So we can definitely get into this and discuss everything around this event and this streaming. It was sort of, in many ways, I think I will be able to say pretty much the high point of a sort of quote unquote performing life during this pandemic. Mm-hmm. So it was recorded 26th and 27th of January. And so thrilling to be in the Metropolitan Museum. Just simply said, it was so thrilling to be there. I used to live in New York City and never went as much as I could have gone. Of course, when life is in full swing, it's hard to stop and do things that you wouldn't normally do. But upon reflection in the museum during this time, I thought, this is just astounding, the emotions, the skill, the display of expression and humanity from the Roman ages and pre-Roman ages, and the Egyptian tombs to all the way up until you get to the contemporary wing. What a celebration of the expressive achievements of mankind. And that was a very, very inspiring way for me to launch into playing. This was not attempting to be a live stream from a concert hall. This was an environment, in some ways, much more creative environment. Maybe not acoustically always geared to what I was trying to do, but I can explain what we did with that. But this is to be playing within feet, a great masterwork of Bach, to be playing within feet of this painting called Autumn Rhythm by Jackson Pollock. Those of you who have seen this in person know how huge it is, covering immense wall space. Yeah, so it was just a very, very inspiring event to be part of. And it's still something I'm living with every day and feeling so privileged to have been able to do. So my partner, George Kondo, is a world-renowned painter and was able to coordinate this streaming with the Met Museum. And it started with me and Limor Tomer walking through the museum on a free day at the beginning of January. We walked through probably a good half of the museum, just looking at the size of the rooms, what was in the rooms, which art was in the rooms, what kind of ideas we had in terms of displaying and showing and expressing this incredible music alongside visual art. And one thing we both agreed upon was that we didn't want it to match in the sense of time periods. In other words, I wasn't going to play. There are plenty of rooms in the museum that have sort of more Baroque artwork or church-like artwork and paintings and sculpture. And oftentimes the acoustics in those areas are perfect for Bach, but it seemed too matchy and too expected as well. It was too fitting the mold of expectation to play Bach against religious icons. I mean, in front of religious icons in a room that has art from the same time period. What we wanted to do was have people listen to Bach in a different way with a new perspective, have people listen to Matthias Pincher alongside unexpected visual art. So it was a question of first me being so caught up in Bach and so obsessed with thoughts around Bach, which we can discuss, but finding the right acoustic for what I thought was right for the Bach. And this actually, you'd think the Met Museum has, thousands of rooms. You'd think it would have been an easier process, but in fact, it was not so easy to match the acoustics of the room with what we thought was also the right visuals for the music. And we started off in the contemporary wing. This is for the Bach now. Start off in the contemporary wing, and it just didn't have the right artwork and didn't have the right feeling for the music. Either it was the artwork was kind of too distracting, or the ambiance of the room, the acoustics were kind of on the cold side. What, of course, I was trying to achieve and what we were looking for was as much of a church-like sound as in terms of the right amount of reverberation, which I think is incredibly important for Bach. But have that, of course, work in context with what art is on the wall. So eventually we ended up in the Pollock Rothko room. And this was the right mixture of beautiful, stunning, hypnotic, artistic, vibrant visual art with this kind of incredibly emotional, sacred, whatever words you want to use for Bach. This ended up being the perfect room. And then we were also wandering the museum, various rooms to find the right ambiance for the Matthias Pincher, and the Veras Blanco room, which is a room, Spanish patio, which was put into the Metropolitan Museum. I'm not sure exactly when it became part of the museum, but it's very Gothic, has sort of a medieval flair, very atmospheric, quite spooky, in fact. And you almost feel like you're outside, but you're not. And it's much more even reverberant in this room. And this was sort of the sound I was looking for as well for the Pincher, which is this sort of ancient, prophetic, just mystical, mysterious ambiance that the music calls for, to have it be sort of a timeless echo chamber. And that's what we found at the Veras Blanco. So that already for us felt like a huge achievement, just to find the two perfect rooms for these two magnificent pieces. So we were happy with that. And then we set the recording days, one day for each piece in each room. So it was really a journey, a process to pick the room and then finally do these incredible days of recording in these rooms. What was for me one of the unexpected things and what I was sort of learning a lot about in this time period is just what it means to do a streaming. Mm-hmm. I'm not a tech person, and I'm not someone that can edit my own music. I mean, there's so many players out there now who are they actually enjoy doing this and they're good at this, but not me. So I was glad not to have any part of that, but just as a performer who has been so used to doing live performances for my entire career, mm-hmm. all of a sudden here I was in a situation where, and fellow players will understand, I think, this feeling very well of, okay, I'm geared for live performance more truly than I am geared for recording. I've always found that my best performances come ultimately from live performances. And if I can have one or two patch sessions to complement the live performances, then we get the best of both worlds. And that for me, the spontaneity, the energy of the public, the energy of it being a ritual, the energy of it being a live event. This is something that gives me energy. Mm-hmm. And I wanted so badly in this case to, even though there was no real audience, there was a few very select people, but very few, because it was in a recording like situation, to capture a feeling of performance, of live performance during this stream, and a feeling of, if people were to put it on and listen at any time, to give them over the tech waves as much as I could possibly achieve in this instance, a feeling of that same urgency, of that same spontaneity, of that same just emotional energy. So this took incredible reserves in my being to get this feeling out in that way. And it was ultimately successful. But what we did was, so the Bach was the first day, and we went in there, and I was immediately sort of floored by this incredible camera setup and microphone setup in this room where I had practiced just for acoustics, and they had let me practice in there just to feel the room and not really look so much at the art at that time, but just hear myself in the room. And with the Bach, how important it is to hear oneself back and to use the counterpoint of the music, to have this carry over in the right ways and have certain notes and certain harmony reverberate for longer than other notes or other harmonies, or to think of this in many ways as a very horizontal interpretation, but also vertical too, to have horizontal and vertical together at the same time and combining horizontal and vertical. So I walk into the room and I'm overwhelmed with this incredible jig-like camera mechanism where it's like in the movies. I felt like I was in the movies. It was just amazing having this 25-foot beam with a camera on the end of it kind of swiveling around, and these great big beautiful lights that were sort of set on a vertical plane, and that made me instantly extremely glad that I had done all of these practices without all that in there, and that this room was feeling kind of familiar to me before this great camera setup. And then really it was about an extremely sort of vigorous warm-up, and we can talk more about that if you want, but just
that'd be great.
Really warming up in the headspace of a live performance on stage in the way I'm going to be playing, getting any kind of kinks out and nicks out, and loosening up the body and getting your mind, especially with Bach, into a space of kind of ecstatic and contemplative and meditative euphoria. This was really the big challenge, and it took time for me to do that. It took over a couple of hours of really just internal playing without getting kind of distracted and sidetracked by all the tech around me. And it kind of gave me a new respect for what actors and actresses do on the set. We're used to having our same setup, which is the stage, the orchestra, the hall, and showing our emotions and our feelings and our gestures in that way. But this is a whole new thing. So that was very different, and I think ultimately very successful. But basically the recording lasted 3 or so hours once the tapes were rolling, and I did basically 2 big run-throughs of the Bach, and then did some pieces of various movements again. And then in some movements were completely untouched in terms of any work being done at all. So I think overall the takes were very long, and there were really not very many of them. So I was thrilled and relieved to have really given the performance that I wanted to give for a piece as incredibly beloved and known as the Bach. And getting into the study and the interpretation was something that began at the very beginning of the pandemic. I can confess to you, and it's not really any sort of a guilty confession, but just a reality confession, a truth confession, that I never until this pandemic felt that playing Bach and my own playing were in sync. And for that reason, I never performed Bach in public, not even one time until this thing. I could tell you that I had a very small run through for about 8 people in the fall, very much around the time that we did our first interview. But it was kind of hard to say whether that was really a true public performance of Bach. Intentionally, I avoided Bach. And some of the people who I love, in 20th, 21st century music, actually don't resonate. Composers that I know don't always resonate with Bach. Some do and some don't. And I had not found a voice or an interpretation with the Bach that I felt was enough to convince me to actually really take it on until this whole thing began with the pandemic, in which I was reassessing what music I could play alone and really thinking actually about Bach, listening to other instruments play from that period, sort of shedding myself of violinistic traditions, which I think in Bach are so heavily laden and have so heavily burdened this music. I have very strong feelings around that, which many people may or may not agree with. But in any case, I had many of these notions which prevented me from really going forward with it until it took a lot of releasing of certain traditions, of ideas of how things should be done, of just thinking only of my own imagination and the score, and thinking about how many different ways just even a single phrase could be done. Mm-hmm. And then you realize that this music is the music of infinite possibilities, and that if you take away any editorial marks by other musicians and other violinists, which there are so many, I just didn't want to see any of that anymore. I didn't want to be told by another musician how I should be playing it. I didn't want to be told what bowing I have to use, what fingering I have to use. I didn't want to be told what dynamic to use unless it's only from Bach himself. And then guess what? As we all know, Bach put almost no dynamics in his music. Mm-hmm. Very, very rarely did he put any dynamics in his music at all. Any inflections were always up to the player. And that is something that, for some reason, I think, in the 20th century, especially early 20th century to mid 20th century, violinists felt somehow that they needed to put more in there so that other players knew more what supposedly the composer wanted. But in so doing, it tells young players, this is how it needs to be. This is how it should be. That the end should be pesante. And it's like, there's no marking whatsoever of a pesante. Did Bach want pesante? Not necessarily at all. So questioning the rhetoric of these editorial markings and really thinking about actually the precariousness, the wildness, the unpredictability of life and in Bach's time is maybe a little bit slightly more similar to the time that we're living in now, where there wasn't the right medicine all the time. There wasn't the care available. People lived much shorter lifespan. Mm-hmm. People being born, people dying all the time. I mean, this was life back in the 17th, 16th centuries. When you sneeze, bless you. I mean, this is what this all comes from, that life in the moment. And so I really started thinking about emotionally, what does that mean for this music? This music often was written for the church, but I mean, the human being behind this music, the humanity behind this music, the human quality behind this music is so intense and so vibrant. So ultimately, I mean, without getting into tiny nitty-gritty details about it, this was sort of the life force idea behind what I was trying to do. And it's very tricky, of course, because people have different interpretive ideas, different ways of of having sort of being well behaved in this music, being sort of studious about it, having different interpretive ideas what should not be done. The only way I could go about this is just, as I've said, to get rid of all of those. So everything came from this idea, and then to have to play, to have this opportunity to play it in front of a vibrant, energy popping, energy boosting piece of incredible art from the 20th century, 1958, by an artist who completely found his own voice in painting, Jackson Pollock, who found this incredible signature way of dripping paint onto the canvas in different ways and having it create this universe. It's like a universe it's a galaxy of stars and life forces, energies. And it's amazing. You get close to the painting, you see prints from his shoe prints from his sneakers or his shoes on the paint that hasn't totally dried yet. You can feel the energy of an artist at work. And this was so inspiring to perform next to. And I actually faced in such a way that at times I could play to the painting, that it was within my line of vision. And there are a few shots in this video where I'm actually sometimes you get the whole camera room angle. You see the whole room, but then you see like literally me, a silhouette against the painting, the Pollock, the Autumn Rhythm, which is just, what can I say? It felt like such a privilege. So this was the day of Bach. And then the following day, I came back in to the Spanish patio and created an echo chamber sound with these incredible just absolutely mysterious, and the word I'm looking for right now is escaping me, but this timeless mystery, enigmatic quality of this human and yet very inhuman alien force. That's the energy of the pincher, and having a whole different setup and universe for this other recording day. And it's really interesting. The Veras Blanco room is right next to the entrance to the museum. So sometimes we had to just stop and let the cherry pickers do their work in the main hall, the main entrance that place, I have a new profound respect for. It's a work in progress. So many different things going on in this museum at all times. And these recording days, which were on a Tuesday and Wednesday, are when the museum is actually closed to the public. But that doesn't mean nothing's happening in there. They have incredible amounts of art being moved around at all times, things changing, exhibitions changing in different areas. And that was another thing that we had to take into consideration. Just keeping in mind that this is a workspace, a creative workspace for exhibiting new art all the time, which was also kind of inspiring. So yeah, it was a memorable experience, to say the least. And there is, even in the Vers Blanca room, there's a violinist sculpture that at times I actually played to him. And you can see this in there, that this in some ways became, in my mind, a duet between me and the violinist in there. So it was epic. It was epic. That was sort of the high point of the last few months.
It's so incredible. And I find that 2020 yielded many gifts for many people. I think that I can see the gifts in my own life. I hear it when you talk about Jackson Pollock finding his voice, and it sounds like you found your Bach through the pandemic. And it's so interesting to hear about the process and see the amount of care that went into all of the details, finding the perfect marriage between the visual elements, the sounds, and also this energy that you talk about. And you mentioned it, and I would love to hear more about warming up at that headspace that you talked about. And if you don't mind speaking more about it and maybe unwrapping it for us, how you got the body and the mind ready. Because I find that when people start working with me in the coaching context, they're often surprised about the amount of time we speak in terms of preparing mentally for performance and practicing with a performance persona in mind, or putting yourself in that headspace, as you said.
It's very complex.
Yes, and people think that they will practice in the practice room and then cross their fingers, walk on stage, and they hope that somehow the things will come together perfectly for this performance. And there is such a big amount of, I would call it, conditioning to get into that performance.
Absolutely. And that is a key word, absolutely key. And in some ways I feel, I paid the price for it in other ways, but very lucky in that I had started performing from such a young age, that this conditioning is not something that you can just learn in theory. It's something that can only be truly experienced in those moments. In practice is the wrong way to say it, because practice performing is different than actual performing. And for that reason, if I was coaching or helping someone prepare for a performance of any kind, I would say there's nothing that replaces performing. Nothing. No amount of practice, no amount of thinking about it. No, you must do it. So whether that means, you stand in front of your roommate, your sibling, your parents, your friends, you gather your friends, you put on your face masks, you do what you need to do. Basically what I'm saying is you do what you need to do. You do what you need to do, and to have that experience before you get into the thing that you really are preparing for. There are things that happen when you have adrenaline in your system. And that's a very kind of scientific way to kind of say it. But there are things that happen spiritually, mentally, physically, to your entire being, that happen when you are under a certain kind of performance pressure, as well as performance euphoria. There's a kind of concentration, a kind of focus that can be achieved that cannot be replicated or duplicated in other kinds of situations. So the idea being that you replicate as much as you possibly can this experience before you get into the real thing. You try to actually trick yourself into thinking it's the real thing, even when it's not the real thing. You do whatever it takes. And I'm quite militant with this in the sense that in this way, I think I was trained exceptionally well, that run-throughs, practice performances are absolutely an essential part of preparation. Practice goes without saying is also essential, but then to go from start to finish of a work without stopping in the performance clothes, in the clothes that you're going to be playing in that's why I was going in and out of those rooms in the museum so often. I had maybe 4 or 5 days in each room to prepare before I was in there. To be in the environment as much as you can. I fight with stagehands for stage time, not necessarily fight, but let's just say I bargain, I coerce, I make it a point that before anyone, pre-pandemic, before anyone was in that hall, I was on stage. And look at the seats, look at the lights, look at the balcony, look at this environment. Look, so that when you get on stage and everyone's in the seats, you say, okay, people are in the seats now, but I've seen this before. So the shock element of the actual performance time, of course, you can still feel a certain kind of shock element, but it's less, you can be sure it's less so having done that. So this mentally is a huge step towards feeling, in my head, towards feeling prepared. Even practicing feeling nervous, which is kind of hard to do when you're not feeling nervous. Things are much easier, of course. Run up and down the street, get your heart like really pumping, get so that you're actually uncomfortable, get uncomfortable. I heard about someone, and I thought it was great, who, had to wear a tuxedo and get used to playing, getting all sweaty in the tuxedo. Getting in your tuxedo, standing in front of a fireplace with a roaring fire in it, and actually sweating and playing sweaty, break a bow hair, play with it hanging down, getting in the way, play with that, get used to playing with your violin attitude. There actually was times in the Bach recording where my strings are not in tune, and I wasn't going to sacrifice good takes because my strings weren't totally in tune. This is not a CD I was making. This was sort of an experience I was making. So, times where things are far from perfect and maybe you feel kind of crappy that day. Good. That's a good day to have a run through practice. Don't reserve the run through practice for when you're feeling great, because people have to perform under all situations, under all circumstances. Maybe you have to play feeling ill. Maybe you have to play something upsetting going on in your life. This is what performing is all about, that people don't know what's going on with you or me or anyone. And you give the best performance you can in the situation that you're in. And I think people often in the audiences glamorize the performer's role in the sense that, ooh, how incredible, how amazing what they can do on the stage. And isn't it fantastic? And oh, it's so dramatic and so glamorous. And it is those things. But the other side of it is actually it's a very macho profession. Here's your instrument, go do it and be good at it. Don't show anyone you got anything that you're battling against besides the music, or if it's that kind of music, show us what you got and do it right now. So you have to have a pretty thick skin in terms of developing this ability to do something really very difficult under almost any circumstances. And this is something that can be only achieved with learning to feel uncomfortable.
That was one of my favorite things from your episode where you were talking about how people are attached to feeling comfortable while they perform, when in fact, exactly what you just said. We are able to perform under any circumstances and feeling anyway.
I mean, there was a point, say, with the Bach recording where I knew intuitively that I was well warmed up. I mean, I was well warmed up in the environment that I was in the sense that if I played too much more, that I was going to tire myself out for the real thing. So it's a very tricky thing to know actually when to stop before the performance, when you kind of pass that threshold where that energy that you need for the performance will get eaten into by the arduousness of the warm up. So to find that balance and to be checking in with yourself, how am I feeling actually? How am I doing? How are my hands feeling? How is my kind of emotional temperature? And how am I feeling? What time is it? What time is it? How much time do I have to now get into my dress clothes and, do the final few minutes or 15 minutes before it's time to go? Time to go, meaning time to start. So, I mean, this is also very important. I think the presentation to oneself. We're always thinking about dressing for the occasion and dressing for the concert, but to me, the ritual begins before the concert begins. So, meaning that it's sort of like a tribal face paint. Makeup becomes for me a tribal face paint. The dress, the thing that you wear becomes part of that ritual. And especially, I think everyone would kind of resonate with this in the age of the pandemic, when you can do these incredibly important Zoom meetings in pajamas. This felt actually extra meaningful to me as well, that part of this ritual is how we present ourselves to ourselves, and what that says to our own selves. What are we telling ourselves about what we do? What are the things that we do? What are the rituals that we do to give ourselves, our own selves, signals that this is special? And this can be applied to anything we do. What signs do we give our own selves? What rituals, what habits do we give our own selves? And this became something also that in the last year, I realized something I very much took for granted, preparing for a concert in this way. When it was all taken away and I had my skill set, then it's time to start doing this, not in the live concert hall, but, for cameras. Or this was something that I thought about a lot as well. And how much actually fun it can be to dress up.
Yes.
It's something easily taken for granted when you have to do it all the time, that all of a sudden it's just like, damn, look at this dress. This is a work of art too. And having said that, the director of the Met Museum, Max Hollein, his wife is an incredible clothes designer. Her name is Nina Hollein. And it seemed ever appropriate to have her design for me the things that I wore for these two pieces in these different rooms, and how we chose almost things that maybe illustrated a little bit or highlighted some of the work in the room. And I think when you watch it, you'll see what I mean. As one of my friends put it, when I entered the Veras Blanco room, I became a Goya painting. I was just a totally, totally different animal and being and person than I was in the Pollock room with the Bach. I transformed it from one animal species or being to another. And that was also fun to do. It was almost like an actress completely changing roles. This was quite fun to say.
Yes. It's so true how we have such a power to generate emotions within us from a place of controlling elements outside of us, such as rituals, putting on the dress. And I love that term that you used, self-signal. I'm going to be using that because I really believe that this is something I use as well for myself in preparation for performance. And I'd never had that term before, self-signal, but definitely something I use. I mean, even I have a process of visualization I do before performance. And a while ago, I started, and when I say a while, I mean years ago, I started adding a sentence in there in French. So I'll try to do a loose translation, but something unexpected happens, and I welcome it with grace. Something, along those words. Something unexpected happens, and I accept it with grace, or I welcome it with grace. And you'll agree with me that something unexpected always happens. And now I always feel that when it happens, of course, I knew this was going to happen. And I always end up not feeling frazzled by the unexpected that shows up because I had ahead of time told myself that when it will happen, I will welcome it with grace. So I had my plan. And when it happened,
That's a fantastic attitude. With grace, always with grace, or if it's not going to be with grace, let it not be with grace. I mean, it's kind of there's an acceptance which is so important, a self acceptance in that moment. And I'm always suspicious when I'm feeling so great the day of a performance or not nervous, and because I know, basically in a matter of literally a few seconds before a performance, it can flip.
mm-hmm.
And then the shock of the flip is can be quite significant. And that I'm feeling, like I got this, I got this today. I got this. I feel calm, and then boom, there comes that wave of adrenaline. You're like, all right, here we go. And I've gotten into this place now where I'm like, good. I'm glad I'm feeling this way. This is what needs to happen before a performance. This is part of the ritual.
Right.
This is what needs to happen. This is healthy to happen. And that kind of feeling is something that should be welcomed, not kind of shunned in any way. So this is very an essential part of enjoying the performance. That people say, "Oh, have fun out there. Oh, have a good time." And then you think, what does that actually mean?
Mm-hmm.
Have fun out there. Because, sometimes it's not like what you would always call fun. It's just part of what we do. So
mm-hmm.
How actually do we, if it's going to be fun, what people mean by that? I think what they mean by that, if you were to ask me, I mean, everyone's different. Everyone might think something different about it. Have fun out there means live in the moment, live in that space where the unexpected can happen. That's the beauty of life, spontaneity, that we don't always know what's going to happen. And one thing that I've also very much enjoyed is playing in my favorite string quartet, which is called, and Fred is a little shy about it, it's called the Fred Sherry Quartet, the cellist Fred Sherry. We have a great quartet, and we just recently live streamed the Schoenberg First Quartet this past Sunday. And this has been absolutely a wonderful, wonderful experience in so many ways. But we had a live stream, which I think will be released as well on YouTube very soon. But it was streamed live at 3 p.m. One of the most difficult things for a string quartet ever to play and perform. And here we were in Bard College in a small hall there, and it was showtime all of a sudden. We had practiced a lot, we had discussed, but then there comes that time where 4 incredibly experienced and mature and big feeling artists have to get together and make a performance. And then you realize that basically, I would say 90% of, maybe not 90, okay, 80, 75% of what happens in the performance is nothing we could ever really rehearse. That we did, of course, map out what we were going to do and, fit things together and did detailed rehearsing. But then what actually happens when 4 different brains, personalities, anatomies get together, then you have something that creates its own special chemistry in a performance. And this was something really wonderful and inspiring and sort of fascinating to feel again. Like, we never could have rehearsed that. Oh, wow. Listen to that. We never could have rehearsed that, but it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And this little inflection that someone reacted to in the group, oh, like that happened because it was a performance. That happened because it was a live stream and we were all there and excited to be there. Like, this is not something we ever could have planned. And when you have that interactive quality between players, this is something so beautiful and something strangely, when I was doing the solo work, I had to generate within myself. I had to sort of spontaneously react to my own self,
Mm-hmm.
which was something so different for me. I've been always playing with big orchestras and working with the conductors and different members of the orchestra, etc. And this solo thing was almost like, okay, I'm reacting to my own self now. You know, like, oh, okay, if I did that, I can do this. Ooh, cool. And it's sort of like this sort of internal Rubik's cube of playing around with things. But this quartet was really just, it was such a joy. One can see our next Fred Cherry String Quartet performance next month if you log on to Bard College Condo Concerts.
Mm-hmm.
CONDO concerts, Condo Concerts, Bard College. You can see our next streaming and you can get the information there. We're doing two. We just did the Schoenberg first, which is monumental. And because we love monumental, our next piece that we're going to be performing is the last Schubert quartet, the G major quartet of Schubert, number 15. This incredible piece of music, and what Fred and I call the Schubert G major minor, major minor, major minor, major minor, in the sense that it's towards the very end of his life, and it's almost schizophrenic at times harmonically, and that I don't think we remain in a major key or a minor. We keep switching between the major and the minors so frequently and so immediately that it creates to me a very, very powerful mix of emotions that only Schubert can do to one. But especially in the age of this pandemic, I was listening, I believe sometime in the fall or over Christmas, to this amazing piece by a quartet that I really love. That's not an official quartet. It's with Gidon Kramer. There's a recording with Gidon Kramer and Yo-Yo Ma. What I love about this is that it's not necessarily always well blended in the ways that some quartets get so perfectly. It's not. These are four totally different personalities. Kim Kashkashian, Daniel Phillips. These are four brilliant players who are four brilliant players in their own right, who have come together to play a great, great piece of music, who have their own voices and own things to say about the music, and four different personalities, and not necessarily trying to achieve the perfection of a voicing in the way that, you know, a professional string quartet playing together year round would. The goals of performing a great piece with four great individuals, singular individuals, it's sort of a different set of goals that start to come about. And I'm very attracted to this, of course, because I don't regularly play year round in a string quartet. And often people, I think, are very sort of intimidated to play string quartet repertoire if they're not a professional string quartet. And this, I think, is a great pity. I think that the great repertoire of the string quartet is something to be celebrated by all, and not just professional string quartets. And having four great musicians, different individual thinking musicians, can be such a gift to this repertoire. Give great new insight to not blending perfectly, to actually purposefully not blending perfectly. I've prided myself in my career as having a very unique sound that will stand out and not necessarily always mesh with someone next to me. That's sort of the beauty of one of the things I've been trying to go for. So I still apply this to the string quartet, maybe to some people's chagrin, but I mean, it's something that I find fascinating. And certainly Fred Sherry is one of the most uniquely thinking musicians that I'll ever know, and an inspiring figure musically. We have a great, of course, long friendship as well, but someone who's taught me so much about music and ways to think about music. So it's a real privilege to play in his Fred Sherry string quartet. So that'll be next month, and very much looking forward to playing this unbelievable cataclysmic piece of Schubert.
That sounds amazing. I'm going to put the links to all of this in the show note, as well as the Met performance, which I'm going to go watch right now when we're done with this interview.
Oh, awesome.
And Leila, how about a round of rapid fire questions before I let you go?
Sure. Fire away.
What's a habit that you have and that you think contributed to your success?
I would say that I am very stubborn in some ways. If I get an idea in my mind, it's very hard for me to let go. And that can be a pain in some aspects of my life. But in terms of setting myself a goal, or the determination aspect is extremely strong with me. If I really come to a place where I want to make a decision, or I give myself a goal, and it is really, really self-motivated by me. I'm not saying all of my decisions are, and I'm not saying I'm always this way, but when it does grab hold of me, and it's almost like slightly obsessive, I will do almost anything to make that happen. I made the quartet really laugh because I alluded to myself as a pit bull gripping a 2x4. I mean, in the sense that once that thing latches on, it doesn't let go. And I'm a little bit like that in that way. Everyone was laughing at me and stuff, and it was funny, but it is sort of true. You have to have this incredible grit, that it's a personality thing, that you just have a relentless pursuit of your goal.
That's very inspiring.
And I would say that I'm not saying in any way that this is, I have this all the time, not at all. It's just when it does happen, I know how much I really want it. I know how much it means to me. It doesn't happen all the time. And sometimes without it, I feel sort of lost. And I long to have that feeling. It doesn't always happen. But when it does happen, it is part of my personality. When it does happen, it really does happen.
Do you have a favorite book that you would like to recommend to our listeners?
I was actually thinking about this question, and it was a harder question than any other that's been put to me lately, partly because I confess I don't read as much as I'd like to read. It's just something that I have a 6 and an 8-year-old, and with the kind of things that have been demanded of me these days, it sounds incredibly non-intellectual, but I'm watching The Crown. I've been searching out different shows, and sometimes really all I can do at the end of the day right now is actually try not to focus on anything. As non-intellectual as that sounds, I spend so much time thinking about how the next months might go, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. It's exhausting. And the last thing I can do, honestly, at the end of the day, is open a book and read. However, one thing I really do love is reading poetry. I have a dear friend who's a wonderful poet. Her name is Natanya Rosenfeld, and she writes me poems. And she actually wrote a poem about the Bach
Mm.
which I thought was incredibly kind of inspiring and wonderful. And maybe I can even send a copy to you to post in some way.
That would be
But
amazing.
this is a poem that was written inspired by the Bach in front of the Jackson Pollock. And sometimes less is more. Less words mean more to me than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something I love to do. Read roomy, different poetry, different things that maybe I can look at and analyze and read, but then think about and have different inflections from these words.
Mm-hmm.
So poetry has been something I think very beautiful for me. But in terms of getting sucked into a book, it's very difficult.
I think many people can relate to this. Me first, actually, these days. In normal times, how do you maintain peak form while juggling a family life, busy travel schedule, and a large list of repertoire?
In normal life. So
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of not applying to now, I guess.
Correct.
Right?
You're right. And if we ever
It's
go back to what was.
what's normal is changing, I think, too. I mean, normal, we thought we all knew what normal was. And now I think one of the points of whether you call it just questioning what is going on right now, which I believe I'm also not alone in doing, which can be quite exhausting, is actually finding a new state of existence. So, going back to what was, it was very hard to do. It was very, very difficult to juggle all of those things. But one of the things that's changed right now is that my kids will be back in school 5 days a week, my 6 and 8 year old, apparently by the end of next month, which is sort of mind blowing. But in the last months, they were home doing computer work, like all kids basically these days. And that's going to shift back and give me more time to not feel like I'm multitasking so much. But I had to carve out, and my beloved mother has been here, but saving my entire life. But time where she say, you can go practice, I'll look after the kids. And then I close the door and forget about everything outside of that room and really try to focus, which was much easier said than done. But it was something that, again, I sort of took for granted in the past, that kids are in school. Okay, I'm in practice. And I got to juggle my business calls and my administrative calls and my practicing while the kids are in school. And that was hard enough. But because of everything that's happened, that all changed. It will go back somehow to some of the way it was before. And the way it was before is comparatively easy to how it's been in the last months. So we all have to, again, prioritize our time, prioritize our goals, make lists if we need to, and stay while being, if I would say, emotional first responders. There's also a time in which it's like, okay, you know what? I'm going to forget about how I feel right now. Now I want to forget about how I feel. I want to think outside my body. I want to look around me and think, what else is going on out there? Because I'm sick of feeling what I'm feeling right now. I want to get out of my own body and mind. I want to get out, think about what's outside of my own little universe here. And, that was a source of frustration for me often. It's like, I'm tired of my own thoughts and my own feelings. I want to get the hell outside my head and outside my body. And then, that's where exercise comes in. That's where watching movies comes in, and find ways to self-distract. Again, easier said than done, but
right.
So important to do.
And in conclusion, is there a piece of advice that you would like to pass on to the listeners?
I would say that I'm grateful. I have humble and immense gratitude for being able to have the ability, and doesn't mean I always do, but to have that chance, that ability to reach people, to heal, to emotionally to heal, means so much more now than it did before. And that is something that people have said these days. And it may not be the first time that you've heard it, but as my identity as a player, that changes my identity as a player.
Mm-hmm.
It changes my own idea of self-worth in a certain way. I feel in some ways more important than I did before. And it has nothing to do with people giving me in any way any sort of praise. It's more knowing my own ability in what I do, in what I'm able to do for people. I played for people individually in this past year who were crying in front of me when I finished playing, and in ways that I never had the opportunity to experience before. And I thought, this is profound, and I felt very grateful and a certain kind of humble feeling of having this sort of healing effect of maybe people have certain locked emotions and feelings that have been stuck, that haven't been able to come out. And then something like this is sort of like opens the floodgates in a very, very good and healthy way for people that, like I've missed having people, humankind, understand my existential feelings and existence that cannot be put into words. This can only be felt through music. So having being part of that is very, very special.
I love that. Leila, thank you so much for this incredible gift of your time and your wisdom. You're someone that I think in the last episode, the word I used was you have so much depth. And I hear this again, we see it in everything that you've shared with how much you care, all of the details surrounding the Met exhibit, choosing the painting, choosing the room, the pieces, even in your choice of clothing. And we can see how profound you are when you approach everything that you do, and it translates in your playing and in who you are. And I'm so grateful that you spent this time with us today.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to be able to just share and discuss with you. So it's a wonderful thing you have going, and thank you for that. And maybe we'll even do another one sometime. You never know.
Sounds good. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Leila Josefowicz. And Leila was kind enough to send us the poem she mentions in the episode, Partita by Natalia Rosenfeld. You can find that in the show notes wherever you listen to podcasts or at mindoverfinger.com/podcast. I would love to know what your favorite takeaways from today's conversation were, so get in touch with me. I'm mindoverfinger.com on both Instagram and Facebook, and share your thoughts on those topics. You can find more information about Leila and her incredible career, projects, and concert dates at leilajosefowicz.com. I'll have that link, the link to her project at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and other fun performances in the show notes as well. So that's it for today. Again, thank you, and à bientôt.